Alaska Airlines passengers bracing for an emergency landing earlier tonight after a section of the plane blew off mid-flight. Good evening and thank you so much for joining us at 11. I'm Barry Mangold. The airline says the 177 passengers and crew on Flight 1282, which was originally headed to Ontario, California, are now safely back in Portland as the investigation continues. K2's Jesse Satin has the latest.
A terrifying incident, 16,000 feet in the air.
We are emergency, we are depressurized. We do need to return back to, we have 177 passengers. It is 18.8.
Minutes after taking off from Portland International Airport Friday evening, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 forced to turn around and make an emergency landing after a section of the plane's body blew out.
You heard a big loud bang to the left rear wheel, like in row 20. And a whooshing sound and all the oxygen masks deployed instantly.
Photos shared with K2 show a gaping hole in the side of the plane, right next to the remnants of a seat. Passengers on board say the plane rapidly depressurized.
I understand from talking to a lady who was sitting in the row immediately behind where the panel blew out that there was you could see later that there was a two-window section panel that blew out. It's about as wide as a refrigerator and about 2/3 as high. And she said there was, I guess, a boy and his mother were sitting in that row, and his shirt was sucked off him and out of the plane, and his mother was holding on to him.
Roughly 20 minutes after taking off, the plane safely touched down back at PDX. According to the FAA registry, the plane, a Boeing 737 MAX 9, was certified for use only 2 months ago, in November.
The most important part of that scenario is to get your oxygen mask on.
Captain David Patton is a retired Southwest Airlines pilot. He says if this had happened at a higher altitude where there is less oxygen, the situation could have gone differently.
At 16,000 feet, it's considerably different than 37,000, 39,000 feet. It can be an explosive decompression where you'd lose a piece, possibly lose a piece of the aircraft at that high altitude. At lower altitudes, it's still an issue because you want to make sure that passengers get their oxygen masks on in a timely manner, and you get the aircraft down below 10,000 feet so there are no problems with people having issues with the cabin altitude.
Captain Patton tells us despite rare occurrences like what happened on Flight 1282, flying is still the safest form of travel, but he has a piece of advice for passengers.
You get, I would say, complacent listening to the flight attendants giving their briefing or the airplane giving its own briefing. Listen to the briefing and make sure that you understand.
Jesse Satin, K2 News.
In a statement tonight, Alaska Airlines said in part, quote, "The safety of our guests and employees is always our primary priority. So while this type of occurrence is rare, our flight crew was trained and prepared to safely manage the situation." The airline added that they are now investigating and will release more information as soon as it becomes available. And Boeing, the manufacturer of the plane, said on Twitter tonight that they are in contact with the airline and a Boeing technical team stands ready to support the investigation.
Another problem for Boeing. This time, an external panel was found missing on a United Airlines flight after it had already landed in Oregon. 139 passengers and 6 crew members were on board for the flight, and according to United, no emergency was declared because there was no indication of damage during travel. The plane was part of Boeing's 737-800 series, which is a precursor to the MAX series that has been at the center of recent incidents involving Boeing. Most notably when a door plug blew off mid-flight in January.
This hour from the live desk, another scare involving a Boeing jet this morning. Look at the aftermath here of this Boeing 737 that skidded off of a runway during takeoff at the airport in Senegal's capital. This appears as if the plane then caught fire. See all that retardant there on the ground. So according to the transport minister, the jet was carrying 85 people. At least 10 of them were hurt. We know those with injuries were being treated at a nearby hospital while others were taken to a nearby hotel to rest. We did reach out to Boeing for comment this morning. They deferred us to Transair, which was the carrier, adding this involved a 30-year-old plane delivered back in 1994.
Time right now is 6:13. An update now on that breaking news Steve was on top of all morning yesterday from the live desk. Severe turbulence that killed a passenger. Several other people remain in critical condition this morning. Singapore Airlines is now apologizing as passengers describe absolute terror on board that plane.
We are very sorry for the traumatic experience that everyone on board SQ321 went through.
I saw people from across the aisle just like going completely horizontal, hitting the ceiling and landing back down in like really awkward positions.
Oh, how awful. Images from inside the cabin show oxygen masks deployed, dents on an overhead compartment right there, blood across one seat. The Boeing 777 was headed to Singapore from London yesterday when it hit an air pocket. A 2023 study claims severe turbulence has increased 55% over the past 40 years because of climate change. And researchers say warmer temperatures are making the jet stream more volatile.
And Holly, those pictures are just terrifying, aren't they?
Awful.
Yeah, from the live desk, we've also learned a team of aviation investigators have arrived in Bangkok this morning to try to figure out how and why that severe turbulence sent that jet into a sudden dive. The Boeing 777 dropped roughly 6,000 feet over the span of 3 minutes, so not much time. At least 85 people were admitted to 3 area hospitals this morning. Hospital administrators say 20 of those passengers are now being treated in intensive care units at 2 Bangkok hospitals. The airline said late last night 4 of the passengers on board that flight were American. 2 of them were hurt. We're working to find out which states those passengers are from.
The airline manufacturer and the DOJ striking a deal. Boeing pleading guilty to 1 felony charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Prosecutors alleging 2 Boeing pilots concealed key information from the FAA during their investigations. The case involves 2 deadly crashes of Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft that killed a combined 346 people. Lion Air Flight 610 nosedived into the Java Sea off the coast of Indonesia in October of 2018.
An accident that was not only preventable, but was the result of a pattern of deliberate concealment.
Less than 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed shortly after takeoff from the Ethiopian capital. As part of the plea deal, Boeing faces nearly $250 million in an additional fine. They also will have to invest at least another $455 million into compliance and safety programs. And for the next 3 years, the company will have to operate under the oversight of an independent monitor. Sinclair's WCIV spoke with one Boeing whistleblower.
If Boeing really changed, things would have been different after the 2 crash.
The problems persisted. In January, a door flew off an Alaska Airlines plane mid-flight. In March, a wheel fell off a United Airlines jet. Last month, senators called Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun to Capitol Hill for answers.
You're cutting corners. You are eliminating safety procedures. For the American people, they're in danger.
I don't recognize any of the Boeing you described.
You don't recognize the Boeing that has airplanes falling out of the sky?
This plea deal between Boeing and the Justice Department requires approval by a federal judge before taking effect. The families of those who died in the crashes, though, are calling it a sweetheart deal and urging the judge to reject it. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
Our 4th story, Boeing has agreed to plead guilty to that criminal fraud conspiracy charge and do that and avoid prosecution for 2 deadly 737 MAX plane crashes.
Senior investigative reporter Lisa Fletcher covered the company since the first crash in 2018. Lisa, you've gotten to know so many of the victims' families. When they heard about this plea deal, what was their reaction?
They hate it. They absolutely hate it. The families say that this is a sweetheart Boeing deal that allows them to avoid prosecution and allows them to avoid responsibility for the deaths of 346 people. The deal is extremely similar to one that was struck with the DOJ in 2021 for Boeing to avoid criminal prosecution in exchange for fines of about $250 million and promises to improve the safety culture of the company. Boeing violated that first agreement earlier this year when a door plug blew out of an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX at 16,000 feet. That violation is what triggered this brush with prosecution and the new deal.
So it begs the question, is there any real teeth in this new agreement, Lisa?
Not really in terms of criminal liability. What this agreement requires is that the company invest more than $450 million over the next 3 years to improve compliance. And they also will have an independent monitor that is appointed by the Department of Justice. However, Boeing gets a say in who that is. And the families say that's just another example of how Boeing has so much control over what's happening with the Department of Justice.
Blown tire! Rolling trucks, rolling trucks, rolling trucks! Emergency, emergency, emergency! They're on fire!